Good morning.
Good morning.
How y'all?
Good.
Everybody all right today? Good. You're here. That's a good thing, right? So, we were reading that scripture this morning, and in that scripture, Moses is leading a flock of sheep out through the wilderness to the far side of the wilderness. He comes to a mountain called Horeb, the mountain of God. But that's not really the beginning of the story. The story really begins back in Egypt. Back in Egypt, where Moses is born. He's born the child of a Hebrew slave. He's placed adrift in a reed basket covered with pitch. They just threw it in the river and set him adrift. And there he's rescued by Pharaoh's daughter, and he grows up in the household of the Pharaoh. Moses is a story. His story is the story of a life disruptor. He grew up as an outsider living in the royal household. He was a part of, and yet really not belonging to the royal family. He was a prince and he was a slave at the same time. He was a Hebrew by birth. And he lived in two worlds, while really belonging to neither one. His life began with disruption and was disrupted then again, very suddenly, when he observed this Egyptian abusing a Hebrew. And Moses decided that he would just take matters into his own hand. And when he thought no one was looking, he killed that Egyptian. Well, he thought no one was looking. But it turns out that word got back to Pharaoh. And when it did, Pharaoh sought justice. He sought to kill Moses. And Moses was forced to once again to flee. And his flight carries him to the land of Midian, where he meets a priest, sometimes called Jethro, sometimes called Ruel. I don't know what his name was, but he was a priest of Midian. And the priest takes him in, gives him his daughter Zipporah as a wife. And again, Moses finds himself a part of a family to which he does not really belong. Twice now, Moses' life has been disrupted. Once, shortly after he was given life, and the second time when he took life. It's about to get disrupted again, a third time. So, having traveled deep into the wilderness, Moses encounters God in a burning bush. And he is given responsibility then for many lives. Through a whole series of disruptions, Moses moves from being an abandoned child set adrift in uncertain waters to being the one who leads the Hebrew people to freedom through the parted waters of the sea. So, this morning, I want us to think about disruption. I want to just talk about disruption. And I'm especially interested in the difference between an interruption and disruption. The Cambridge Dictionary defines interruption as an occasion when someone or something stops something from happening for a short period of time. That's an interruption. So like you're working at your computer, at your desk, and the phone rings, and you stop what you're doing, you answer the phone, and as soon as you set the phone down, you go back to what you were doing. And nothing has really changed. That's an interruption. It's a temporary break in the action. It's like, I don't know, this might be dating me a little bit. Anyone remember going to see Lawrence of Arabia in the theater? I'm the only one? Come on. Come on, you saw it, right? Do you remember that halfway through the movie, what happened? There was an intermission. They used to do that in movies. And that one is particularly since it was like 227 minutes long. They had the intermission. And then you went right back to the story. When there's after an interruption, we go right back to doing whatever it was that we were doing before. We go back to watching the movie, reading the book, or just living our lives. A disruption is different. A disruption is defined as a major disturbance, something that changes our plans or interrupts some event or process. It's a break in the action, especially an unplanned or a confusing. That word's confusing. A confusing one. There is no going back after a disruption. There's only one way to go after a disruption, and that is ahead. Once Moses had been set adrift in the Nile, he could never go back to that life that he might have had. When he strikes the Egyptian, his life is irrevocably changed. And he can never go back. The choice to turn aside and investigate a burning bush alters his path forever. An interruption is a temporary inconvenience. A disruption leaves us floundering in the wilderness, unable to return and uncertain really of where to go, of the way forward. Friends, I want to suggest that our lives have been disrupted. Would you agree with that? Our lives have been disrupted. This COVID pandemic has made a return to life as it was impossible. We can never go back to who we were and what we were doing in 2019. The workplace has changed. The schools have changed. The church has changed. The way we buy groceries has changed. The way we relate to one another. All of that has changed. I never thought that I would have to hesitate and think about whether or not to extend my hand to a stranger, to shake hands. But that's changed. I find myself keeping my hand at my side. It's kind of this little game we play with each other. Is somebody going to extend their hand or not? That's changed. The General Conference of the United Methodist Church is our only governing body. The only way that we can make policies and decisions is through the General Conference. And the General Conference can't meet. It hasn't been able to meet since there was a called session in 2019. And then the regular session was canceled. And we were going to do it again this year. But that was canceled. And now the General Conference won't meet until 2024, which leaves us as a church wandering in the wilderness. And you know what? I think that is good news. That we are in the wilderness is good news. Amen?
Amen.
You're not so sure about that. Throughout the Bible, wilderness is always portrayed as the place where God shows up. Or maybe better, it's the place where we get desperate enough to notice that God is there. The wilderness is that place where we are simply not in control. We human beings are not in control when we're in the wilderness. It's a place where weakness is revealed, where we realize our limitations, and it's a place also where values are clarified. In the wilderness, we figure out very quickly what's really important, what's essential. Now, some people will tell you, and some people believe, that wilderness makes us stronger. God puts us in the wilderness to make us stronger. That's not true. Wilderness does not make us stronger. Wilderness reveals our weakness. And wilderness offers us something that we desperately need. God. In the wilderness, we encounter God. You know, Elijah, Moses, David, Jesus, they all spent time in the wilderness. Elijah flees from his enemies into the wilderness. And there he hears the still small voice of God. Moses leads the people through the wilderness to the promised land after encountering God in that burning bush at Mount Horeb. David spent most of his life in the wilderness. He was a shepherd, tending sheep, and then later he led a band of bandits who hid out in the caves of the wilderness. He spent most of his life in the wilderness before becoming a king. And we all know that Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness before he began his public ministry. Wilderness is important. We are, at this very moment, hopefully, we are emerging from the wilderness. We've been in the wilderness for 2.5 years or something like that. Our lives have been disrupted. And honestly, we can never go back to the way things were before this pandemic. If you're sitting around waiting for that to happen, stop. Stop waiting. It's not going to happen. We aren't going back to the way things were. We can't go back to the way that things were before the last presidential election. That election and the series of events that surrounded it, that changed our world. It changed who we are. We can't go back. We can't undo that. We can't go back to the way things were before the death of George Floyd. That opened our eyes in a way that we could never be closed. The way back to our former normal is forever closed to us. The way forward, the only way open to us, has yet to be revealed. We're still figuring it out. How do we move forward from where we have been? So today, we find ourselves occupying liminal space, meaning we are in that undefined space, somewhere between the wilderness and the promised land. Well, for Moses, the space between being a fugitive from and a champion for justice was defined by a burning bush that was sitting on holy ground. That was the defining moment when he moved from fugitive from justice to champion for justice. Do you remember what God told him? Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place that you are standing is holy ground. The place that you are standing is holy ground. Today, you and I are standing on holy ground. We are in the liminal space between what was and what will be. The old normal is gone and the new normal is emerging. And you know what? That is an incredibly exciting place to be. It's incredibly, it's a bit scary. Whenever change is always a little bit scary. It's a bit scary, but it is incredibly exciting. You know, speaking through the prophet, God spoke to the exiles, saying, do not remember the former things, or consider the things of old. I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Like those exiles, who were carried away into captivity in Babylon, our lives have been disrupted. The former things are now beyond our reach. The way we have always done things is no more. It's time to set our eyes and our hearts on that new thing that God is doing. To look to the future. To look forward. You know, we may well be in the heart of the wilderness. The good news is we are not alone. We are never alone. God has been with us throughout this entire experience, throughout our entire lives. God has been with us. God will be with us always. God's promise to make a way in the wilderness, to make rivers in the desert still stands. God is faithful. And God will make a way. As the song says, we are standing on holy ground. And I know that there are angels all around. Let us praise Jesus now. We are standing in his presence on holy ground.